The instant you wounded her pride, not her feelings, something fundamentally changed in ways most guys completely overlook until everything unravels. If that statement just triggered discomfort somewhere deep inside you, perfect. That discomfort means you're exactly where you need to be right now. Quick reminder before we continue, hit that subscribe button and drop a like on this video because I'm about to share psychological insights that rarely get discussed openly by someone who truly understands what's happening beneath the surface. Your arrival here wasn't a random chance. When you damage a woman's pride instead of her emotions, you're touching the aspect of her identity she protects most fiercely. Her emotions forgive silently over time, but her pride? That doesn't forgive quickly. Pride remembers everything. Pride reconstructs how she perceives you entirely. And this explains why she cannot release you now. Not because love still exists, not because her emotions are shattered, but because her self-image demands a resolution it will never receive. Whether intentional or accidental, you triggered something profound within her, something driven by competition, something instinctive, something beyond conscious control. Here's the reality. A woman's pride connects directly to her perception of desirability, her sense of influence, and her feeling of emotional authority. When you interrupt that connection, even subtly, she experiences it as losing part of the control she believed she maintained over your dynamic. The moment she senses control slipping away, her unconscious mind begins pursuing the aspects of you that generated uncertainty. Not because she desires you specifically, but because she craves the version of herself that existed when she felt selected, validated, appreciated, and truly seen. This explains why withdrawing contact affects her so distinctly. For most guys, radio silence feels like personal discipline. For her, it becomes an unexpected mirror, forcing self-reflection. She continuously replays the moment her pride took damage, not because the memory brings joy, but because the sensation is unbearable. She attempts to dismiss it. She reassures her friends that everything's fine. She mentally convinces herself she's completely past it. Yet part of her still monitors your profiles, still questions why you've gone quiet, and still considers how you escaped her emotional influence. You didn't shatter her heart. You disrupted her self-perception. And that becomes an injury she cannot dismiss. Pride doesn't forgive. It rewrites your story. When a woman's pride sustains injury, something psychologically compelling occurs. Something most guys underestimate until they're fully committed to the no-contact strategy. She begins experiencing an attraction she struggles to articulate, combining frustration, intrigue, and an unusual need for affirmation, specifically from you. Not because you represent her only option, but because you're the singular guy who disrupted the story she constructed about herself. Trust this. That disruption reverberates louder than any emotional pain possibly could. Consider this. A woman anticipates emotional turbulence in romantic connections. She expects conflict, tension, even potential endings. What catches her off guard is encountering someone who eliminates her emotional advantage. You didn't simply exit. You became unreachable. You established a distance she never chose. And that generates a psychological imbalance demanding resolution. Whether acknowledged or not, she feels the sting of losing predictive ability regarding your behavior. That unpredictability carries immense power. It maintains your presence in the recesses of her thoughts, even during active attempts to forget you. Withdrawing contact reveals something she'd prefer keeping concealed. Her psychological dependence on the emotional authority she previously held over you. She wasn't dependent on you personally. She was dependent on the identity she embodied in your world, the iteration of herself who felt admired, valued, pursued, and craved. Losing access to that identity damages her pride more severely than losing your actual presence, which explains her mental return, regardless of how desperately she attempts escape. She's not pursuing love. She's pursuing identity reconstruction. Your silence resonates more powerfully with her than any words you might speak. Each passing day without outreach, she constructs different explanations for your absence. She questions whether you've transformed. She wonders if you've reached finality. She considers whether you've evolved beyond the version of herself she worked to project. And that consideration troubles her most profoundly. The potential that you perceived through her facade. Not her appearance, not her demeanor, but the protected layers beneath her public presentation. Your absence compels confrontation with the truth she never wanted to acknowledge, that the emotional superiority she believed she possessed was never guaranteed to be permanent. And when a woman recognizes she miscalculated a man's emotional resilience, obsession develops. Not an obsession with reunion, but with proving to herself that she retains the ability to impact him. Here's what most guys completely overlook. When a woman cannot release you after pride damage occurs, it's unrelated to your perfection or her continued affection. It centers on dominance, perception, and the unspoken regulations of her emotional framework. She's mentally reviewing every exchange, every statement, every moment, because her subconscious seeks to reclaim the narrative she assumed she controlled. Understand this. Pride wounds are adhesive. They don't diminish with time passage. Ego wounds don't heal. They demand resolution. They fester quietly like gradually building storms, and those storms don't require your authorization to intensify. When you went silent, when responses stopped, something unanticipated occurred. Her mind shifted into obsessive patterns. She believed she'd witnessed your worst, but now absence magnifies everything she failed to understand about you. Why did your reaction unfold that way? Why didn't you resist? Why didn't you plead? Her questions rarely surface consciously. They float beneath awareness, within brain regions designed for analysis, strategy development, and ultimately emotional dominance reclamation. She's attempting reconciliation between the guy she believed she controlled and the guy now existing completely beyond her influence. The honest, brutal reality is this. She isn't contemplating closure. She isn't evaluating whether you deserve her consideration. She's focused on her pride's survival. Every contact-free day passing, she imagines scenarios where influence over you returns. She envisions conversations where she'll make you comprehend her desires, yet part of her recognizes she cannot force outcomes. That tension, that invisible mental conflict, disrupts her sleep. That explains her social media monitoring, her noticing changes in your existence, or casual inquiries about you through mutual connections. It's not love driving this. It's a psychological compulsion, and this reveals why withdrawing contact functions differently than guys realize. To you, it might feel like patience cultivation, a quiet evaluation, or simply progressing forward. To her, it represents a complete disruption of her emotional equilibrium. She's imprisoned between pride and longing, self-image and curiosity. The injury you inflicted maintains her scanning for indicators, interpreting silence as a calculated strategy, distance as demonstrated strength. When a woman cannot release you after pride damage occurs, it's unrelated to your perfection or her continued affection. It centers on dominance, perception, and the unspoken regulations of her emotional framework. Her mind loops perpetually, because releasing you would require admitting the single thing she cannot admit. She no longer commands control over your story, so comprehend this with absolute clarity. You're not the obsession object, because affection persists. You represent the reflection of her damaged pride, and the longer you maintain silence, the more powerfully that reflection occupies her consciousness. The tension you're sensing between her actions and her language, that's the invisible force of her unresolved pride, attracting her towards you without conscious awareness. At this phase, her conduct may seem perplexing, even contradictory. One instance, she appears detached, cold, or disinterested. The next, she transmits subtle indicators, a benign message, or discovers reasons to reappear in your sphere. This isn't emotional disorder. It's psychological warfare within herself. Her pride seeks reassurance, but her self-image refuses direct requests. So she experiments, she investigates, she monitors your responses because every reaction either heals or deepens the damage you created. Comprehend this with clarity. When a woman's pride sustains bruising, she doesn't pursue through obvious methods. She seeks indirect verification. She desires knowing whether significance remains without admitting care exists. That explains why her contact seems casual, perhaps meaningless. But randomness doesn't exist here. Each message, each look, each seemingly accidental encounter serves measuring your emotional accessibility. She's not attempting reconnection, she's attempting footing reclamation. And here most guys commit the critical error. They respond excessively fast, excessively warm, excessively available. Doing so, they surrender the psychological advantage they unknowingly acquired. The instant you reassure her pride, tension evaporates, mystery disappears, and once her pride feels security again, her interest vanishes just as quietly as it materialized. Not because care never existed, but because the psychological imbalance maintaining her attachment no longer operates. Your restraint sustains her mental engagement. Your composure compels confronting uncertainty. When you remain stable, calm, and non-responsive, you achieve emotional self-sufficiency. And that proves deeply disturbing to someone who once believed she accessed your inner reality. She begins questioning whether you've emotionally matured, whether you've progressed forward, whether you're becoming an iteration of yourself she can no longer shape. This isn't manipulation, it's psychological truth. Humans gravitate toward unresolved tension. Pride, particularly, resists conclusions it didn't authorize. And currently, her pride remains trapped in loops, seeking resolution she cannot dictate. Every day you don't pursue, don't elaborate, don't defend yourself, you strengthen the concept that you're no longer functioning from necessity. And here's the aspect most guys find challenging accepting. The moment she perceives that you genuinely no longer require her validation, obsession reaches maximum intensity. Not because relationship desire exists, but because the aspect of her that once felt powerful now feels transparent, and transparency to pride is insufferable. So if you sense her energy transforming, resurfacing, boundary testing, don't react with panic. This represents the natural result of maintaining emotional self-worth. You're not creating distance. You're compelling her pride to confront something it's been avoiding. The influence loss over someone who no longer pursues approval. Now listen with attention, because here, everything either solidifies or disintegrates. When her pride reaches maximum discomfort, she begins rationalizing emotions through methods protecting her self-image. She constructs narratives. She recontextualizes history. She minimizes what she experienced, even as behavior quietly contradicts her declarations. This internal negotiation exhausts her, and the longer duration extends, the more psychologically invested she becomes, not in you personally, but in resolving the tension you symbolize. At this juncture, she may convince herself that she initiated withdrawal, that interest departed first, that you never held real importance. This isn't rejection, it's self-protection. Her pride requires believing control remains intact, even when evidence indicates otherwise. And the more calmly detached you stay, the more difficult maintaining that illusion becomes. Your silence doesn't assault her, it exposes her. It compels sitting with unanswered questions regarding her influence, her desirability, her impact. What maintains her connection isn't hope, it's incomplete psychological business. She wonders whether you truly progressed, whether someone else now fills the space she once inhabited, whether she completely misjudged you. These thoughts don't originate from affection, they emerge from uncertainty, and uncertainty becomes the mind's preferred fuel. It generates rumination, imagination, and emotional cycling. She may even feel frustration with herself for caring whatsoever, which only intensifies the cycle. This explains why restraint matters beyond strategic thinking. The objective isn't provoking, impressing, or reappearing at calculated moments. The objective is emotional congruence. When your conduct aligns with self-respect rather than reaction, you transmit messages without speaking. You demonstrate that your self-worth doesn't depend on her attention. That realization lands heavily because it dismantles the dynamic she once relied upon. And here's the truth many guys struggle accepting. If she contacts you and you respond from necessity, the spell fractures, pride calms, mystery dissolves. But if you respond with clarity or choose non-response entirely, you maintain the psychological tension, keeping her mind engaged. Not because you're withholding deliberately, but because you're no longer available for emotional manipulation. This phase isn't about winning, it's about achieving emotional independence. When a woman perceives that independence authentically, not performatively, her pride confronts a decision point. Either release completely or re-engage under different conditions, and that decision, finally, no longer remains under her control. By this point, you should comprehend the invisible gravity you've generated. She's captured in loops where her pride cannot settle, and those loops exist entirely because you withdrew, not from cruelty, but from self-respect. The more you remain emotionally unshakable, the more her mind circles back toward you. She analyzes your absence, questions her assumptions, and mentally replays every interaction she believed she dominated. Every passing day without contact strengthens the psychological impression you created. This explains why so many guys misinterpret her actions. They assume that because she doesn't call, text, or pursue, indifference exists. But truth operates oppositely. Her silence carries mental energy, directed squarely at you. She remains invested in the narrative you interrupted, still attempting to reclaim the aspect of herself that felt validated through your attention. And when reclamation fails, her frustration, intrigue, and obsession amplify. She doesn't need you returned. She needs understanding why her grip dissolved. Consider it this way: a woman's pride flourishes on predictability, admiration, and control. When one element shifts unexpectedly, particularly through your absence, her mind refuses releasing the tension. She doesn't consciously strategize haunting your thoughts. She simply becomes a phantom in her own psychology, replaying your final interactions until rationalization or reassertion occurs. This explains why withdrawing contact works fundamentally. You didn't break her heart. You disrupted her emotional authority. Now, the ultimate truth remains simple yet rarely understood. She will obsess over you until her pride decides it's been addressed on her conditions, not yours. She might attempt power reclamation through subtle experiments, indirect messages, or appearances seeming coincidental. Every attempt reflects her validation need, not affection. And every time you respond from need, you dissolve the precise tension keeping her engaged. Every time you maintain composure, you strengthen it. So your path is transparent. Remain consistent, emotionally independent, and anchored in your own value. Detachment is not rejection. It's the ultimate value demonstration. By staying unshakable, you force her pride to confront truth she cannot control, that your presence in her world is no longer determined by her approval. She may never vocalize it, but internally, she acknowledges the transformation. And that, beyond anything else, keeps her mentally connected, navigating the territory between obsession and acceptance. Remember, you didn't hurt her heart. You awakened an aspect of her pride that refuses to let go. And when a woman's pride encounters an immovable man, she cannot ignore the attraction, regardless how intensely she tries. If this resonated with you, make sure you hit that like button for Psych Seeker and let me know in the comments what part hit hardest for you.